Hello everyone! The channel called Let's Ask Seki Sensei has been making a bunch of really interesting videos in which a master of Japanese martial arts tries European weapons for the first time and tells us what he thinks of them. And a few weeks ago, Seki Sensei treated us to a video on the indomitable Halberd. And inquiring minds would like to know what I think of it. And who am I? Well, my name is Oscar and you're watching my channel called The Virtual Contextual. I am a HEMA instructor from the Netherlands and I teach a wide variety of weapon disciplines from the late Middle Ages to the early Renaissance. However, the Halberd used by the Landsknechten must be one of my absolute favorites. I have handled the originals, I teach classes in them, I train and spar with them regularly in and out of armor. So how do I think Seki Sensei did? Let's roll the intro and find out. So before I say anything about any detailed scenes in this video, I'd just like to remark that I really enjoy the enthusiasm with which these guys embrace this new weapon. I think it's a really important part, this playfulness, curiosity and joy. And it's a really important part of your martial arts journey and I really love seeing that here. So we see Seki Sensei do a really wide variety of different techniques with the Halberd against the katana here. Now, of course, I'd like to also see them do Halberd against Halberd, but I'm guessing they just only had the one polearm, so they chose this weapon pairing. Maybe something for a future video of theirs. However, I'm going to say this up front and right now, their technique is just really good. You can definitely see that this guy knows what he is doing. He may have a background in staff arts previously and not necessarily anything with a lot of blade attached to the head like a halberd, but that doesn't really seem to stop him from quickly figuring out how these things work. And it's not that weird because you see very similar things in European fight books from the late 15th, early 16th century. For instance, the fencing master André Paurenfeind has a whole section of staff in his fight book and then tells you that the same things apply to every other polearm, including halberds. So yeah, the technique on display here is pretty solid. You can see parries with the back end of the staff and then transitioning to a different grip to hit with the business end. It's all pretty solid. Now, if you're waiting for me to do a full breakdown of every technique and why they work, or perhaps why I think they won't, I'm going to have to disappoint you. Skalgrim already did a video on that and he did a very good job of it, so I'm not going to do that again. I have a couple of other things to say though. Not all of these techniques fit and work in the same context though. So some of them would be really good on a battlefield, while others would be more suited to the Vechtschule. This was a sort of public fencing event that took place in late medieval and early modern German cities, where a big part of the proceedings were public fencing matches, with things like the Tassak, a one-handed weapon, the longsword, and of course halberds and other staff weapons. Now, the goal of these matches was of course to win them, but just as important, if not more important, was to impress the audience and the other fencers present. So this technique, this one-handed cut with the halberd, would be right at home there. It would not work that well on the battlefield, I would say. You generally don't have the space for it, and it's this high-risk, high-reward kind of thing. Doesn't translate too well when people have armor and they're trying to actively kill you, so it's more suited to the Vechtschule. But there it really shines. If you can manage to pull this off, people will be talking it for weeks, if not months to come. And this is also why you see it in a lot of fight books, and especially the ones that were already in this Vechtschule tradition actually show a lot of one-handed swings with polearms, even halberds. Now, in my own experience, if you're trying to fight in armor, as people would be doing on a battlefield, even if it's just very simple, very basic armor, just a breastplate and a helmet, you're going to be fighting very differently. The point is going to be way more important. You're going to be making somewhat smaller movements. There's still big cuts, but only when the opportunity arises. And for the rest, you're going to be very much more focused on the point. So in this sense, these different contexts really dictate how you have different techniques. And we're on to the next part and how the turns have tabled, because now Seki Sensei has to fight off the halberd with the katana. And this is a really hard matchup. The halberd has such a great reach advantage, so it's very difficult to get to negate that. However, you see experience shining through here, and it's really nice to see that. He does a pretty good job of it. I will say though that the student is perhaps being a little bit too passive to my liking here. If you have such a great reach advantage, just waiting is perhaps a bit of a misplay, I would say. Instead, if you have such a much longer weapon, you kind of want to be a little bit more aggressive. Because what you can do is you can directly attack your opponent and they cannot directly attack you. So they have to engage the weapon before they get to you. You do not have to do that, you can attack them directly. And this is a very potent advantage, and I don't see him using it that much over here. That said though, the solution of trying to hit the halberd on the flat of the head is pretty great. There's a lot of free real estate there, and there's a lot of stuff that you can control, especially if your opponent is holding it all the way in the back. There's just a lot of leverage you get there, right? And Seki Sensei sees that and uses that really well, so that's excellent. You also see this quite a lot in greatsword techniques that are meant to help you deal with polearms. So specifically Marozo has a very nice thing where he basically tells you to go and grip the blade, extending your leverage, allowing you to much more easily beat aside any polearm, getting close to where you, with a sword, have the advantage. I've managed to make this work in sparring for me quite a lot of times actually, and it's pretty sensible, and we see something similar at work here. So Seki Sensei's counter to this is also very interesting. So you see him sliding his lead hand forward, and what this does is it effectively increases the leverage he can apply to this bind, and it decreases the leverage his opponent can apply, which is excellent. So any sort of controlling techniques kind of like stop working in that case. Now this is quite interesting because if you look at illustrations of Landsknechte fighting with halberds, you see something very similar where they're not holding the halberd at the end, which you might be expecting, but more in the middle in a very similar way to what Seki Sensei is doing here. And if you do see him hold the halberd at the end, it's more when they're extending it over their head, when they're in the process of bashing the skull in of some unfortunate soul that cannot defend themselves anymore. So most of the time you will see them holding the halberd in the middle. And I think that has a lot to do with a similar effect. So keep in mind, a lot of these people fighting with halberds are fighting in battles, so you have to assume that your opponent has at least some sort of armor, even if it's only a breastplate and a helmet. And that really changes the dynamic. So in our sparring we have found that you really cannot count on one hit taking out your opponent. There's just too high of a likelihood that you hit an armored area which really does nothing. So you want to keep up that momentum, so you hit and then you hit a couple more times again for good measure. And for keeping up that momentum, it's really nice to have a grip that maybe sacrifices a little bit of reach but gives you a lot of control, the ability to redouble your attacks and to quickly parry just in case. And of course, wearing armor yourself is also great because it allows you to take a little bit more risk as well. And I think that brings us to the end of the video I'm commenting on. Overall, I'd say I really enjoyed this, not just this video, but the entire format of it. I really like seeing the enthusiasm for the new weapons. I really enjoy looking at this skill, and it's also really nice to see weapons that I'm very familiar with through the eyes of someone from a completely different martial tradition. That said, I do think that any future videos by Seki Sensei on European weapons that were mostly used on battlefields would really benefit from taking the role of armor into the equation. It's just really nice to see how wearing armor completely changes the dynamic of the fight and the different techniques that you can use in it. And honestly, I'd just like to see him try it. Alright, this was the first time I did a reaction video of some sort, and if you thought it was cool, just let me know in the comments. I might do a few more in the future. If you had to suffer through it, you think humanity would benefit if I never did any one of these again, then also let me know. Also, if you thought it was cool and you're new to the channel, there's a whole lot more other videos that you fellow Halberd enjoyers might really like, so go check those out. And finally, I'd like to thank my patrons. I know most of you really want me to make method tutorials, but you stick with me if I go off on these greatsword or halberd related side quests, so that is really much appreciated. Anyway, hope to see you all for the next one, and until then, okie dokie.